time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, by George, I think he's got it. Now, here's George.
Well, hello, hi, how are you? And welcome on in to another podcast by George on a kind of a foreboding morning here. It's kind of weird out there, folks. I don't know if you've noticed that or not. And the forecast is really strange. We're going to get some massive winds here in the heartland, unusual for this time of year. And it's right on the heels of these extremely unusual tornadoes that moved across the midsection of the United States overnight on Saturday. So a little bit of fear and trepidation out there. And I got to tell you, I've always loved covering the weather. I mean, when I was in the news business, when I was on the radio, it was hard to get listeners a lot of times, but not when the weather broke, because that's where everybody went to, particularly back in the day. They turned on the radio and you had a huge audience and you were doing some benefit and some good for folks in those weather circumstances. And like I always told people, the weather people they're criticized for being wrong so often. But I always told them, if they're wrong, it's not going to hurt you. If they're right and you're not paying attention, it just might. So anyway, that's kind of the prelude, kind of the introduction to our show today. And I want to bring our guest on in, and we're lucky to have him, particularly this morning, because there's a lot going on we've got to talk about. Our guest today is Dr. William A. Gallus, Jr. He's a professor of meteorology, and he's been at Iowa State University for over 25 years. So he's got a long track record of studying what's going on. But there are a lot of eyebrows going up in his business here just over the past, I don't know, a couple of years maybe. Things are different than they used to be. We'll talk about this. His research interests include improved understanding and prediction of thunderstorm systems, their evolution, rainfall, and severe weather, as well as prediction of winds for wind energy. So, and that couldn't be more important. Convection allowing numerical models such as WRF are an important part of this research. And he also looks at how climate change may impact extreme weather events. So let's bring down our live line there, and let's see if we can bring in Dr. Gallus and welcome him on into the podcast by George live line. Good morning, Dr. Gallus.
Good morning, George.
This is going to be an odd day. I've already been outside, and I mean, the best thing you could do is just walk around. I mean, just take a look. The clouds are moving very quickly overhead. There's moisture in the air. We got a little bit of rainfall overnight. Not much, but just enough to put some into the lower atmosphere here. And then we've got this forecast of these huge winds coming across, sweeping across the heartland, coming down from the mountain slopes. And so it's kind of creepy outside. And then I come indoors and NOAA, the NOAA radio, which I monitor, I know a lot of folks do as well. They've got an announcement on their channel today that their towers they're offline. They've got a hardware problem of some type, not related to this weather system, and nothing to be alarmed about that way, as far as I know. But anyway, if you can't get NOAA, or you're getting that announcement this morning, that's what that's all about. But let's bring up this first chart here, and you can talk us through this a little bit. Now, what we're looking at, describe this for us. This is what we're talking about presently.
Right. So, George, this is the most recent severe weather outlook for today. This is issued by the Storm Prediction Center. They're the national authority on severe weather. And what you're seeing is there's a big red oval over much of Iowa into Minnesota, and that is a moderate risk. So that's a level 4 out of 5 levels for the expected amount and intensity of severe weather. There's only one level higher called a high risk, which sometimes doesn't even get issued at all during the year. And I looked back, and I believe this is the first time this entire year that Iowa, at least a decent portion of Iowa, has ended up in a moderate risk, which is really strange for our most active severe weather day to potentially happen in December.
Yeah, I got to tell you, Doc, I've been looking at these things, these convection models and the weather maps and stuff for years, if not decades. I've always been interested in. I've never seen anything like this. Not this time of year. People, I mean, this is a pretty blasé looking little map, but somebody like the doc, this has got to jump right out at you. This is strange.
You're right. When I woke up and I saw this morning, it took my breath away. I had made the comment, the Storm Prediction Center issues a day 3 outlook. So two mornings ago, they said no chance of any severe weather in Iowa. And several of us were kind of surprised. We knew the weather pattern was going to be very strange today, but it certainly suggested there could be severe weather. So by the middle of that day, they issued an extremely rare update. This is the only time I've heard of them updating their day 3 forecast to then put Iowa in level 1 of a risk, but they said the risk would just be winds. Then, got up yesterday morning, they had raised it one more level and started mentioning tornadoes. And then when they did their second update yesterday, they upped the chance of tornadoes even higher. And then, I wake up to this, which is 2 levels higher than the risk yesterday. So pretty much for the last 48 hours, every forecast that has come out of the Storm Prediction Center has been escalating the danger for Iowa.
I know a lot of my viewers are concerned and probably alarmed. And like I started off saying, it's okay to be alarmed. It's better to be alarmed than not. And this past week is evidence of that. I think there are some people that might have been saved if they had taken the appropriate precautions. There are even reports coming out now that some people at a job site were told to stay on the job instead of taking shelter when those warnings came down. And, that's unconfirmed, and that's going to be the foundation for some litigation and some other things. But that's some of the worse news that I've heard coming down the transom this morning. Well, let's move through this slide deck here. I've grabbed some things here, and I want to bring these up and see if I can add this one in. So this one again looks like a pretty blasé map, but this kind of shows what's happening here with these winds and the circumstances coming up. What's this map tell you, Doc, if anything?
Right. So the slightly lighter brown color that has a bit of an orange hue to it would indicate areas covered by high wind warnings. High wind warnings are actually pretty rare. I think we often go through the entire year in Iowa and may not have a high wind warning. I've never seen so much of the country covered in a high wind warning. And then the areas that are a darker brown are high wind watches, which means the event is just a little further away in time. And so they'll probably be upgraded. And high wind warning generally means that the winds are going to be gusting above 50 miles per hour. And the fact that so much of the country is covered by these warnings is really a sign of how powerful this low pressure system is. The Weather Service here in central Iowa compared it to an event that happened 23 years ago. We set the state record in Iowa for the lowest barometric pressure in a cyclone, and it happened in November. Much of the state had wind gusts of 60 to 80 miles per hour when that happened. But one key difference is that system was kind of starved for moisture. So it didn't do a whole lot in the state of Iowa other than produce extremely strong winds all day long. I still remember that event. It was horrible. You couldn't really be outside. This event appears to be as strong as that one, maybe even stronger for the winds, but it actually has energy. It has the warmth and the moisture that you can feel if you step outside this morning, which is why we expect thunderstorms to get involved and potentially produce tornadoes in the state.
I'm not the world's foremost weather expert. I would never play myself off as that. I was in the news business, and I've always had an interest in this. But, I think of hot and cold, obviously, low pressure and high systems. I think of moisture and dry air. Do we have those factors, those components in play today?
Right. We have absolutely everything under the sun. At the Weather Service, it's been interesting to read you can read these discussions, which gives their background logic. And, for one thing, parts of Iowa are already breaking the high temperature record for today. Many places might break the monthly high temperature record for the entire month of December. It is likely we're going to break the record for the highest dew point. So the highest amount of moisture we've ever had in the air in December. They're talking in parts of Western Iowa, we may be affected by something called a sting jet.
What?
A sting jet. Yeah, add this to your list of things like polar vortex that you never used to hear. Typically you see these happen in cyclones that are up toward the North Pole somewhere. where you develop this river of air with extremely strong winds that is actually able to make it to the ground. And some of the computer models show this happening in parts of western Iowa, so that even after you're done with the thunderstorms this evening, the winds might go up to 80 to 100 miles per hour. So we pretty much have all the ingredients that we need for say, tornadoes.
Well, I want to continue to run through some of these images now. Just because I'm putting these up doesn't mean that, let's see here. There we go. That they're kind of different ways of looking at the same thing, perhaps. This is a little bit, maybe a better graphic depiction, Doc.
Correct. And so you can see right away, those oranges, almost red colors, are what leaps out at you. And it matches pretty well that earlier map you showed with the brown areas where there's high wind warnings. I believe when this particular forecast is made, they actually kind of synthesize or average together a lot of our different computer models. So what ends up happening sometimes can even be worse than what this is showing. But from what I see here, it does seem to imply a large part of Iowa is going to have winds gusting at least in the 60 to 70 mile per hour range.
I also mentioned that weather forecasters are wrong. The local television hosts get a lot of criticism. But most recently, in the most historic tornado outbreak in the nation's history and maybe in the world, people don't realize that. I mean, this has international implications. What happened through Arkansas and Kentucky in the past week or so. They were right. They were on it. This was forecast, right?
Right. The forecasts for the Friday event were perfect. That's why it is so sad when there's still so much loss of life. But we knew that event was going to cause big problems because it was going to happen at night, and the storms were going to be moving fast, 50 to 60 miles per hour. I think some of those tornadoes may have moved as fast as 70 miles per hour. So that's why those of us in Iowa today really need to take precautions, because we're kind of stunned that the conditions look almost identical for central Iowa, and especially northern and western Iowa late this afternoon and evening, to what was present in the Central Plains. I posted to social media yesterday that a big challenge for us meteorologists is we've never seen anything like this happen this time of year. We have nothing in our historical record that we can look back on and feel confident. So we have to rely on our theory, and everything looks very, very bad for today. But until today, there's only ever been 4 tornadoes in recorded history in December in Iowa, and they were all in the southeast corner. And Minnesota has never even had a tornado warning, let alone a tornado in December. And yet parts of both states today, the computer models are screaming that there's going to be tornadoes. They could be strong. And something else to keep in mind, we thought the Kentucky tornadoes were moving fast at 60 to 70 miles per hour.
Wow, that's really fast. That's the other thing it just kind of goes by people. Those storms moved really fast. And the other thing that I heard that was, maybe you can comment on this, they were really tall. They were really high. Thunderstorms sometimes can go to 50,000 feet. But tornadoes are, visually, you can see they're usually kind of low. These things were really massive vertically, really fast. And some of that debris that was churned up into these storms, it's going to end up a hell of a long way away, because believe it or not, I think some of those storms actually carried some of that stuff in the jet stream. And again, that's unusual.
Correct. And so what I was about to say, so those storms were moving fast at 60 miles an hour or so.
Yeah.
Our computer models are telling us that the storms in Iowa later today are going to move at 80 miles per hour. Wow. I saw a statement from the Weather Service that if there's a tornado on the ground, it will cross an Iowa county in 20 minutes. That's
not much warning. That's the big point of that, right?
Makes it very hard. And I said to my students, it would be, if you're sitting outside, think, I'm going to watch the storm come in, and you might see stars overhead. You might decide to go in for a drink and come out a few minutes later, and the tornado will already be like racing towards you. That's how fast things change when they move at 80 miles an hour.
Wow.
And
go ahead.
I was going to say, and as you said, when you have such strong winds like in Kentucky, it did allow those storms to produce tornadoes whose spin could be seen going way up toward the top of the thunderstorm clouds, which is one reason why they're finding debris 100, 150 miles away from the track.
Good Lord. Well, here's another graphic here. We'll bring this up now. This is, we're talking home cooking here, folks, here in the heartland. And this is, again, a good graphic depiction of what he's talking about. I think this is fairly current, Doc. Is this what you're seeing?
Yes, this is fairly current, and at the site where George found this, the Storm Prediction Center, you can actually also select individual types of severe weather, like tornadoes or wind. In the tornado, in the most recent update that came out about 8 a.m., they added what they call it hatching across the tornado risk. So there's a 10% tornado risk over that red area that is shown on this graphic, which is actually very high for tornadoes in Iowa, but they've added hatching over an even bigger area, which means they expect there will be some especially strong or violent tornadoes. And they also believe this is going to happen, after dark. Sunset's really early this time of year. So it's a very dangerous situation that we're not used to seeing in Iowa that is predicted to happen later today.
And I want to encourage all of the viewers, the listeners, people that are checking out Podcast by George this morning, log on, just make a comment or a question for the doctor. I mean, this affects us all. I'm no more of an expert. He's an expert, but I'm no more of an expert than you are. So if you've got questions about all of this, please ask away. Let's take a look at this next one up here. This is the same thing that we looked at before, a little bit more of an expanded view, but it's not a good expanded view for us because I'm assuming that red area is probably the most at risk.
Correct. The red area has the highest risk. And, when I mentioned that you can bring up on their site, you can bring up individual parameters, the wind, the threat of severe wind is almost at the top of the scale. So there's a 45% contour indicated coloring for 45%, which pretty much means there's about a 50-50 chance that somewhere within 25 miles of every point is going to have damage from severe level winds, which are basically 58 miles per hour or stronger.
And this map is not really indicative of what I'm going to ask, but it is remarkable for this time of year. And we looked at another version of this earlier. But one thing about this, Doc, I always kind of glanced down and looked down around the Oklahoma area and Kansas and places that are traditionally referred to as Tornado Alley, which can reach up into Iowa, particularly the southwestern portion of the state that you talked about. Well, what about what we saw in Kentucky and Arkansas and places like that? And what about what you've been seeing over the past several years? Is Tornado Alley moving? Is it changing? Is it going further to the east as an example? That's kind of how it looks to me.
Right. My perception was that there's been a lot of big outbreaks further east, but there have been other researchers who've looked at this carefully and have proven that if you're in the normal tornado alley out in the Great Plains, the amount of tornadoes is staying about the same or going down a little bit, but it's going up pretty rapidly to the east of there in places like Missouri, Arkansas, Southeast Iowa, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee. So if you imagine what that is doing, is it is making Tornado Alley bigger, but it would actually be making it bigger on the east side. So it's kind of causing the whole Tornado Alley to appear to be shifting eastward, which is bad because the further east you go from the Great Plains, the more population there is, the more targets there are for tornadoes to hit, causing damage or injury or death.
Let's get some of these comments and questions. And this is a friend of the PBG, Pamela Milner, asking the question. And Doc, you mentioned evening and nighttime even, but what time do you expect any tornadic activity going through here? The local television station has said it, should be this afternoon. Is that the timing?
So our computer models show the storms crossing the western border of Iowa around 4 p.m. and probably being located near I-35, so right up and down the middle of Iowa, about 6 to 7 p.m., and then already probably swinging out of northeastern Iowa by about 9 p.m. So the tornadoes are going to cross, or the severe storms are going to cross the state of Iowa much faster than you could do it in your car driving, even if you were speeding a little bit.
Yeah, and again, that's not the nature of what I traditionally always thought of with tornadoes, and it drives home the horror of the circumstance in Kentucky and through Arkansas. Tornadoes used to, you hear isolated storms. Tornadoes were isolated. They didn't last very long. They would touch down, they would go back up into the clouds, they would skip around. The duration really usually wasn't the issue. I mean, everybody talked about it in terms of wind speeds, but it looks like these tornadoes are getting more prolonged, and they have this massive line that went through the southern part of the United States. I had a question for you that's kind of off the wall, and probably there's no direct relation, but do you see any relation between this and that line, that derecho line that went through Iowa? Are there any comparisons or anything similar to be drawn?
I would probably say not really, except there is a threat that the event that happens today could cause enough straight line thunderstorm wind damage to also be considered a derecho. So it's just a very unfortunate coincidence for those of us in Iowa. The derecho is still in everybody's mind. I know most people are still very, probably more afraid than they would be normally because of their memories of that. And today could be a combination of a derecho and a tornado outbreak.
And we're not going to see a derecho forecast, I don't think, because as you mentioned on an earlier show that I had you on, derecho is kind of a historic past event where it's named after the fact. They don't really forecast it, do they? Or do weather observers like you just know based on the circumstances that it's a possibility?
So I think, when we had our conversation before, I pointed out derechos tend to be very difficult to forecast. Often they happen in an atmosphere where the weather parameters are such that you're not sure it's going to either be all or nothing, that you're not really sure that something's going to be able to get going. But if it does, it becomes a derecho. However, today, I believe the Storm Prediction Center is actually mentioning in their discussion the term derecho. So today is a day where they feel confident, I think, that so many thunderstorms will be able to produce derecho strength wind that it is likely in the end there will really be a derecho today.
Well, hold on, folks. I mean, it's a possibility it could get very dark and nasty, very grim. But let's look at the other side of this, Doc. I mean, I'm just your average guy. And I always tell people when it gets to be 90 degrees plus, there's a possibility something's going to happen. I mean, when it's that hot, particularly if it cools off quickly, there's going to be a storm. Also, when I look at high winds, a lot of people say, well, it's just windy. And I've always thought, I don't know what it is. Convection stirs up the atmosphere. I don't know what it is. But when it's real windy, a lot of times there'll be a major weather event that follows. Now, today, for sure, we're going to get these huge winds. My God, they're talking 70-mile-an-hour winds, maybe in excess of that. Is it possible that we just get strong winds on a day like today and nothing more?
That is entirely possible. When I referred yesterday, I said it's hard to have a lot of confidence that things are going to really include tornadoes today because it's not ever happened before this time of year. You mentioned in the summer, if you have a 90-degree day, it's pretty easy to imagine there's a lot of energy in the atmosphere to create storms. Today, it'll be 70. So the amount of energy is probably just barely enough to get a good thunderstorm. And with how strong the winds are, that thunderstorm is really going to have to fight not to be knocked over by the wind. But that such strong winds do make it easy to spin up a tornado. So, George, I mean, being very honest with you, I would say it wouldn't totally surprise me if it turned out we get lucky and no tornadoes happen. But the wind is a guarantee. It is going to get extremely windy, because that's happening on a large scale. And so, large scale things are easier to forecast, but the tornado risk is certainly there. And the thing that's surprising to many of us today is all you have to do is go up about 1,000 feet in the atmosphere or 2,000 feet, and the winds are blowing at 90 to 100 miles per hour. So even a fairly wimpy little rain shower should be able to not have too much trouble bringing those stronger winds down to the ground. So that's why the wind threat is very serious. And the tornado threat is very serious. It's just a little bit, less certain if it's really going to happen.
But flooding isn't too much in the picture. This isn't going to be a big rain event, do you think?
No, and sadly, a lot of us and I were on the dry side.
Yes.
But when you have storms moving at 80 miles per hour, and these are going to actually be pretty narrow storms, a lot of people who don't get hit by the super strong wind gusts in the storms or a tornado will probably think, Well, that was a whole lot about nothing. Literally the rain might take 5 minutes to blow through your area because it's moving so fast.
Well, folks, we're very lucky to have Dr. Gallus on the podcast by George live line this morning with this storm looming. And I know I watch these types of things, and a lot of times I'm sitting there listening or watching and thinking, ask him this, come on. So I want to encourage all, people that may be listening or watching this on Facebook right now in particular. Go ahead. I'm putting some of those comments up and ask your questions so that we can get these answered. So there is a possibility that we're just going to get a strong wind today, but don't diminish or poo-poo the effect of the wind, because if these are hurricane force winds that we're talking about. This is going to blow down your privacy fence. This is going to send your trash can sailing. It's going to cause some property damage, particularly in the outlying area, unprotected type areas. I mean, just the wind is going to be an issue, and it could get much worse than that if it spins up these storms. And my God, perish the thought of what happened just this past week or so in Kentucky. Well, I wanted to kind of have the elephant in the room on the show a little bit, because I mentioned in your bio, Doc, that you're studying this, you're looking at these storms, and that's kind of the short-term analysis, what we're talking about today. But the long-term analysis is climate and what effect this is due to the climate change. And I found this chart. I want to bring this up now. It's climate related, but I had never seen anything like this before. I know you've seen different depictions of this, but this is the Arctic, and it's warming more than twice the global average. So we're well aware in other parts of the world here how temperature is increasing, climate is changing. Well, in the Arctic, it's really changing. Look at these color bars. I mean, this goes, good Lord, back to 1893 is where we're starting on the left. And then look at the gradients here as we move along, and look where we're at here on the far right-hand side of this. And as far as here where we're located, Doc, how much does the Arctic affect our weather pattern?
So you might think, well, the Arctic is far away, although on a January day in Iowa, sometimes it feels like we're in the Arctic. The Arctic does have an impact on our weather. One of the key things that this does, what you're showing in this graph, is if the Arctic is warming more than the rest of the world, that normally tends to diminish the contrast in temperature, which usually slows down the jet stream. So, when people say that climate change or global warming is going to make for more hurricanes, they're only seeing half the picture. The warm water is favorable for hurricanes, but the weakening of winds, well, actually, it's more complicated for hurricanes because the winds actually strengthen near the tropics, which hurts hurricanes. But what you showed applies to tornadoes. So having warmer weather down low helps you to get tornadoes, but having less wind aloft tends to make it harder to get tornadoes. So that's why it's often really hard to say for sure what the effect of climate change will be on tornadoes. The main thing we can say, though, is with a warming planet, it should become more common getting some tornadoes in winter, which is normally the quiet season, because winter is quiet because it's usually too cold. And we should probably start seeing tornadoes happen in areas that haven't seen them before in the winter, which today might be a classic example of that. So you can't prove a connection with climate change with any one weather event like a tornado outbreak today, but it certainly is consistent with what we expect to see in the future. More days like December 15th, 2021 happening in places like the Western or Northern Corn Belt, which never used to get tornadoes in the winter.
I'll put this next question up because, every now and then I'm fortunate enough to get kind of a guest commentator, somebody that has an excellent question. And of course, Laura Bellin with Bleeding Heartland is all of that. I mean, she's a working journalist, and she is outstanding. Here is her question. She says, sorry, she missed the beginning. The KCCI meteorologist, Chris Glenker, posted today that the city of Des Moines broke its record high temperature for the day at 5 a.m. It broke the doc has alluded to that. How would Dr. Gallus respond to those who say, now this is really significant? And I hear this kind of stuff all the time. Doc, I play hockey. You got to hear what hockey guys say in the locker room. They say this weird weather just happens sometimes, and it isn't related to climate change. How do you respond to people that say stuff like that?
So, it is always complicated. Climate automatically implies you're not talking about one city or one day. So even a record temperature being set at 5 a.m., you can't say that one thing proves it. Just like you can't say that because it was record cold in Texas last February that proves that climate change isn't happening. You have to look over a longer period of time. And so the record in Des Moines, what's very interesting is I think I read this month so far, I believe there's been 3,000 record high temperatures set around the United States. There's only been 10 record low temperatures. So that is the kind of data that really proves, is climate changing. And clearly, if you have 3,000 record highs this month and only 10 record lows around the country, that suggests, yes, things are warming up.
And what about this one? We talked about this a little bit earlier, but Trish wants to know what's the difference between what's being forecast today and the derecho. I know there's a lot of similarities, but are there any differences?
So there are a lot of differences. If you remember the derecho, the winds that happened in the derecho were entirely caused by the thunderstorm. And therefore, much of the state had, say, frequent wind gusts from 60 to 80 miles an hour for maybe up to about 30 minutes. A smaller area had, gusts to 100 to 140 miles an hour for maybe up to an hour. And once the derecho was done, the winds were done. Today, because this is a very big weather system, we're going to have winds gusting, above 50 to 70 for many hours. We might have 10 hours, for instance, of winds getting that strong. The individual thunderstorms could send the winds up to 80 to 100 miles an hour, and we could have tornadoes with winds getting to 150 miles an hour embedded. So I would say today, the really extreme winds will just be in isolated spots, maybe along the tracks of some of the really strong storms, but we're going to have a much longer period of pretty intense winds that will be capable of doing damage. And typically, the amount of damage you get often is related to how long it's staying very windy. So there are a lot of differences. Even if today gets classified as a derecho, I think it will be a very different type of derecho. It won't be a solid line, moving across the state with such intense winds. It will be individual thunderstorms producing intense winds along their path. And the storms might stay alive for a long time. Some of our computer models this morning that show us which storms will likely be rotating cross the entire state of Iowa, which is a little scary because that's what they showed in Kentucky on Friday. And, we know we have a tornado there that might have been on the ground for 200 miles. So you could imagine there could be, maybe a 200-mile long swath of intense winds above 80 miles an hour that might only be like 3 miles wide.
My God. And, be aware, think about where you're at is the way that I put it to people. You're at work today and you're going to be getting off late. You're going to be getting off dark. Think about the building that you're in, folks. I mean, you need to be aware of these types of things. Think about your home. I know people do. Of course, if you're in a mobile home, and I was back in the day, back in the 70s, man, I was living in one because the conventional home mortgage rates were 17.5%. I couldn't afford a real home, and I got a mobile home, and my God, I was running out of that thing back then. It seemed like every other day because of storms. I mean, you don't want to be in a mobile home, even in just the winds, like the doc is talking about this evening. That's probably not a good place to be.
Right. I've had people asking me already through texting, college students worried that they live on the top floor of an apartment and there's no basement, what they should do. And, the really big threat, the tornado threat and the threat of thunderstorms is going to pass in like an hour or two. So I just say, well, go visit your folks, go to your parents' house around supper time. Maybe you'll get a free meal out of the deal and they have a basement. So, that you really do want to think about where you're going to be, from 5 o'clock on, especially if you're in a mobile home, the winds could still cause big problems even after the storms blow through much of the evening. So just plan to have something in mind of what you would do when you hear warnings come, or if you're noticing the winds really are getting strong. I've also, George, should point this out too. A weather friend also pointed out, today's going to be the kind of day that if you hear thunder, you want to maybe go to the basement right away because it's going to be difficult for the Weather Service to keep up with the tornado warnings because the storms are going to be moving so fast. And so if you're hearing thunder, that means obviously there was a thunderstorm. And if there's a thunderstorm, the winds today are so incredibly strong, it would be very easy for any thunderstorm to spin up a tornado. So probably just assume there's a threat of a tornado if you hear thunder and take your precautions.
Wow, folks, that's a podcast by George Liveline exclusive. Again, I've been around this for decades, and I mean, just living in this part of the country like our viewers are. I've never heard anybody say that before, where you might want to think about sheltering as soon as you hear thunder. I mean, that's a change. I mean, that's worth doing this show in and of itself. And we're already past the half-hour mark, Doc. Have you got a little more time to spend with us, or what's your
I'm
timeline
fine.
like?
I'm fine. I know the sun, ironically, is shining on me, which might be causing a problem with the video. My students and I were commenting yesterday, the sun is not something we want to see today.
Right.
The one thing that could save us from a lot of tornadoes is if it stayed a little cooler than expected, because then you don't have enough energy to create the thunderstorms. And here in Ames, at least, we've had a good bit of sun the last hour or so. I think every bit that it gets above 70 degrees today is going to raise the threat of thunderstorms with really bad winds and possibly tornadoes.
Well, let me move along here and bring this up. And this is a little bit of reflection, but it's very important for what probably is going to maybe not become the new normal, but it's going to become much more frequent. This was in the USA Today. Tornado path through 5 states may be one for the history books, folks. December tornadoes, as Dr. Gallus has said, are uncommon, but not unheard of. The explosion of twisters across 5 Midwest and southern states over the weekend, that might be unprecedented. It hasn't happened before. The tornadoes that spun off of that fast-moving storm Friday night and into Saturday morning probably killed more than 70 people. And people have a tendency just to overlook that. 70 people dead and in the ground, folks, in Kentucky alone, according to the governor there, and at least 16 in the 4 other states. And I'm looking at some of the devastation, some of the photos that are coming out of there, Doc, and you can see one there. One of the biggest problems in the southern states, which we're fortunate here, well, some are anyway. Most of those homes that I'm seeing scoured foundations and slabs, basically. These homes are built on slabs. They don't have a lot of basements down there. Basements are a pain in the butt. I mean, with leaking water and that type of thing in this part of the country. But they can save your life in some circumstances. And a lot of those people didn't have one.
Correct. I think in Iowa, we're sort of spoiled and you end up picturing that everybody has basements, but there's surprisingly large parts of the country, even places like Oklahoma that get lots of tornadoes. It is very rare to find a basement. So that's one thing we can be thankful for tonight, is if we do have tornadoes happening at night, fast moving, like what happened in Kentucky, one would assume most Iowans probably have a somewhat safer place to take shelter than many of the people in Kentucky did.
Okay, let me see if I can get this one to come up on screen here. And I know you're familiar with this. Tell us what we're looking at here, Doc.
So one of my friends, Tim Marshall, is the world's foremost expert on tornado damage. And so he's been called in to go down to Kentucky, or he's been working around Mayfield to look at the damage. So this was the first Presbyterian church in Mayfield, Kentucky. It was the oldest church in the community, built in 1834, I believe. So this is a before picture of that church, a beautiful, beautiful old structure, beautiful interior too. And so Tim took this picture yesterday as he's surveying the damage. That's what is almost the same view. That is what's left of the church. It was basically totally destroyed. It had a very steeply sloped wooden gable roof. I believe he figured out, so the roof pretty much blew off, collapsed, and then the huge masonry walls came crashing in and crumbling as they did. And so, that's really sad. It's impossible to replace something that was built in 1834. And there still has not been an official damage rating assigned to this tornado, but Tim was also posting pictures where it seems as though this church was very well constructed, with anchor bolts, rebar going down in, and the anchor bolts were basically broken off and rebar twisted. So, it's making me think it's more likely it's going to get the highest rating that we assign in EF5.
Yeah. And what's that? That's like a 200 mile an hour plus wind or something. That's what I see when I look at this, Doc. I'm looking at a building that if it could survive the blitz, I would think you could bomb this thing. I mean, I'm looking at that church, and look at that brick, and I'm thinking, well, wind's not going to damage that. Holy jumping. I mean, look at this thing. That's unbelievable. That's what happened to all that masonry and all that brick and all that stuff that looked like it could survive anything, but it couldn't survive what appears to, that looks like an F5 to me.
Right. It's incredible damage. I believe he said the walls at this church were 11 inches thick, the masonry. So, I mean, like you said, it probably could withstand the blitz, but it didn't withstand this tornado.
Oh, God, no. Okay, so and this is kind of the storm track, and this doesn't look real significant, but again, I know to Dr. Gallus, this probably jumps off the screen at him because of the line that we're seeing there. Describe that for us.
Right. So the Storm Prediction Center every day has a follow-up and marks every storm report they receive. So in this one, there's lots of blue dots. There were over 400 reports of severe level wind causing damage on Friday night. The red dots are the tornado reports. And so one of the things that you really see standing out is that stripe of red that starts in Arkansas and heads over to Kentucky. So what ends up happening is, as the experts do their surveys, those might all be combined. If they find that was one long tornado, then this would be replaced, with a single line, and it would reduce the total number of tornadoes that ended up happening. If your viewers can look in the lower left of that picture, right now it says there were 70 tornado reports, but we know there weren't 70 actual tornadoes because some of those will probably be connected and will be the same tornado. And I just wanted to show that map. It just shows you how big an area was affected by the severe weather on Friday night. There were important tornadoes way up almost near to Chicago. There was tornadoes in Ohio, even down in Mississippi and Alabama. So that again was a surprising aspect of this December outbreak. And interestingly, today we thought maybe the Storm Prediction Center would have a bit of a risk right over Iowa, that it was going to be a pretty small event. But as you all saw from the picture George showed earlier, the risk looks like Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, even down into parts of Nebraska, Missouri, and Kansas could have severe weather today. So the picture tomorrow morning might look not too different from what you're seeing here, unfortunately.
And I can bring this back up again. This is, a lot of things to look at here, and everything means something. It's a nicely put together graphic. I mean, we're talking, they say moderate risk, but there's only 5 levels of this, and we're at 4. Widespread severe wind gusts, some 75 miles an hour plus, a few tornadoes. And again, unless you're in one, it only takes one, folks. Let me tell you something. And some of the cities in the crosshairs here: Rochester, Waterloo, Ames, La Crosse, Cedar Falls, Albert Lee. Now, they're not mentioning down in towards Des Moines, but I mean, we're close enough to that dark red area to be considered at risk, right, Doc?
Right. You shouldn't, no one should be splitting hairs that technically the north side of Des Moines is in the red area, and the south side is in the orange. It just means the very highest risk and probably the greatest concentration is going to happen a little bit to the north of Des Moines.
Well, I've really enjoyed this. Like I've mentioned, I'm kind of a weather wonk. It's, the name of my podcast sometimes could be bittersweet. I mean, I like reporting on this, but you got to remember, folks, 80 plus, maybe 90 people died in this past week, and we're looking at some potential. We're going to get some destruction from this today just because of the wind, if nothing else. And God, let's hope, keep your fingers and toes crossed that nobody gets injured and perish the thought dies because of this. I think we probably should wrap it up, Dr. Gallus. Again, thank you very much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it, particularly today, because I know you're going to be busy. Give us a wrap up here. Give us some advice and kind of a closer for the folks that are listening to their weather radios and watching podcasts by George today.
Okay. I would just say, make sure you have a plan for what you will do if you hear about a tornado warning. If you have things that you can bring in from the outside that would blow away, it'd be very good to do that, because for sure it will be windy. The most dangerous time in western Iowa would be maybe 4 to 6 p.m., central Iowa 6 to 8, eastern Iowa, 7:30 or 8 on to about 9 or 10. And just keep in mind, if the tornadoes happen, it will be after dark, and they will be moving at 80 miles per hour.
Unheard of. Unbelievable that something like that could come at you 80 miles an hour. We've had tornadoes all along, folks, but we ain't had them like this. Dr. Gallus, thanks again. We'll call back. We'll check in with you. Maybe we'll do a little postmortem, a little wrap up on this once it's passed. Thanks so much for coming on the PBG.
Well, thanks, George, for having me.
And folks, if you like Podcasts by George, if you like getting this kind of access, if you like getting your comments and questions answered by an expert like Dr. Gallus from Iowa State University. Please like us on Facebook. Share this with folks. You can watch this on YouTube. It'll be up here very shortly as I repurpose the video and also the audio versions. If you want to listen along, you can always get those on Spotify and the iHeartRadio app. Of course, they're on your iPhone, places like that. Just about any place that podcasts are seen or heard, you can find the platform that you like on podcastbygeorge.com. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.